when Carney meets Trump. The Prime Minister heads to Washington to talk trade and tariffs as auto and steel industries warn of mounting job losses.
He does so under the weight of his own expectations.
He does need to show some progress. The fact that there hasn't been any progress after missing deadline after deadline does make Canadians sort of wonder.
Mark Carney arrived in Washington ahead of his second Oval Office meeting with Donald Trump under pressure from the opposition back home to bring back solid results.
Hey, welcome back to the channel. Something just happened in Washington, and almost no one saw it coming. On October 7th, 2025, Mark Carney walked into the White House, not as the target of Trump's tariffs, but as a potential partner. For years, the two names were linked by conflict. This time, they were linked by necessity. Behind the polished handshake was a storm neither side could ignore. The U.S. economy had just lost 32,000 private sector jobs in September. 22 states and Washington, D.C. were sliding deeper into economic weakness, and the October jobs report, the one everyone was waiting for, never arrived. A government shutdown left America flying blind, with no clear sense of how bad things had actually become. Across the border, Canada was moving in the opposite direction. After 3 months of decline, its GDP quietly ticked up 0.2% in July, just enough to avoid recession. For Ottawa, it was a relief. For Washington, a reminder that the balance was shifting. But here's the part no one's talking about. This meeting wasn't just about repairing relations. It may have been about rewriting them. And what was discussed behind those closed doors could reshape North America's entire economic map. So, what really happened in that room? And who walked away with the upper hand? Before we dive in, tap that like button. It tells YouTube this content matters. And that's where the story takes an unexpected turn. While Washington was busy fighting off a looming recession, Ottawa was quietly rewriting its own playbook. Once seen as a casualty of Trump's tariffs, Canada began to reinvent itself, not through confrontation but through diversification. Bloomberg economists now project a modest yet steady rebound, 0.5% growth for Canada's third quarter of 2025. It's not a surge, but it's a signal, proof that the country's strategy of spreading risk may finally be paying off. In just 2 months, Ottawa signed a free trade agreement with Ecuador and an investment treaty with the United Arab Emirates. Small steps on paper, but powerful signs of a broader shift. Exports are climbing toward Europe, the UK, Australia, and Indonesia, slowly reducing the country's long-standing dependence on the United States. And beyond trade, Canada is taking its first serious steps toward defense diversification, opening procurement talks with European and Asian manufacturers, signaling that security, too, is part of its new industrial policy. As Prime Minister Mark Carney put it, Canada needed the fracture to learn how to stand on its own. If you've made it this far, consider subscribing. It's how we keep uncovering what others won't say. But beneath the optimism of Canada's rebound lies a tougher reality. The handshake in Washington may have come with conditions. Behind closed doors, sources suggest the conversation wasn't just about goodwill, but about leverage. The United States, now facing mounting pressure from manufacturers and voters alike, may be preparing to ease the very tariffs that started this standoff, but not without something in return. Since early 2025, Washington's 50% tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum have driven up costs for its own industries. The irony is striking. Nearly 75% of the aluminum used in American factories comes from Canada, meaning the U.S. is, in effect, taxing itself. The result has been rising input prices, delayed projects, and growing frustration among domestic producers who once supported the protectionist push. Rumors in policy circles point to a potential compromise, lowering tariffs to 25% or introducing a quota system for tariff-free imports in exchange for deeper cooperation in defense and security. For the Trump administration, that kind of deal could be sold as a symbolic victory at home, protecting American interests while restoring economic ties. For Ottawa, however, the calculation is more delicate. Winning tariff relief without surrendering economic sovereignty has become the central test of Carney's leadership, a quiet, high-stakes negotiation where every concession carries long-term consequences for Canada's independence. From trade to defense, the Trump-Carney meeting appears to have gone far deeper than anyone expected. One unexpected topic: missiles. Trump hinted that Canada was showing serious interest in joining the Golden Dome, a U.S.-developed missile defense network modeled after Israel's Iron Dome meant to shield the North American continent. "Canada called us. They really want in," Trump said, framing it as a sign that allies were turning back to Washington. If realized, the project could mark the most significant U.S.-Canada defense partnership since NORAD in 1958. Ottawa is reportedly weighing a deal, buying 16 additional F-35s, bringing its total to 88, in exchange for tariff relief on steel and aluminum. Yet Carney's government is also quietly keeping the door open to Sweden's Gripen jets, using competition as leverage. The Golden Dome may offer protection from new threats, but for Canada, the bigger question is whether it brings true security or a deeper dependence dressed as partnership. As the job crisis deepens, the auto sector has become the testing ground for U.S.-Canada relations. High tariffs have hurt both sides, but paradoxically, they've also created an opening for cooperation that neither government can afford to ignore. Since April 2025, the U.S. has imposed a 25% tariff on vehicles imported from Canada, a move Ottawa swiftly countered with an identical tax on American-made cars. The result has been painful. Cross-border supply chains, once praised for their efficiency, are now described as unsustainable, with costs rising faster than profits. Factories in Michigan and Ontario have been hit hardest, facing delayed parts, shrinking margins, and growing layoffs. Yet, amid the disruption, reports suggest the two governments are exploring a joint manufacturing framework, a potential North American auto compact, to stabilize production ahead of the 2026 U.S. election season. If realized, it could serve as the foundation for a USMCA 2.0, centered on electric vehicles and clean energy integration. What began as a tariff war may quietly evolve into an industrial partnership, one driven less by politics and more by the shared need to keep North America's engines running. Power in this new era isn't measured by size, but by leverage. Mark Carney seems to understand that perfectly. Canada may be smaller than its southern neighbor, but it holds resources the U.S. cannot easily replace, from uranium for nuclear energy to critical minerals that anchor America's defense supply chains. By controlling access to those materials, Ottawa has quietly gained a form of influence rarely acknowledged in public. Analysts suggest Canada could prioritize U.S. access in exchange for tariff relief or market concessions, turning strategic dependence into a negotiation tool. In recent months, Carney has even lifted several retaliatory tariffs, not as a sign of weakness, but as a way to clear diplomatic space. It's a strategy described by one former ambassador, Frank McKenna, as soft but deep, subtle moves that carry disproportionate weight. Taken together, these steps sketch a new kind of power map for North America, one where allies negotiate as equals, and cooperation is built not on loyalty, but on mutual necessity. Behind those few hours inside the White House lies far more than polite diplomacy. It holds the blueprint for decisions that could define the next decade of North American history. Economists are already calling this moment the start of a reconstruction of alliances, a phase in which trade, defense, and industrial policy across the continent may all be rewritten from the ground up. What's at stake is not just tariffs or supply chains, but the balance of power between two economies that have shaped one another for over a century. And the question now looming over both capitals is simple, yet profound. Who will lead this new order? Every day, more than 3.6 billion Canadian dollars in goods and services cross the U.S.-Canada border, supporting millions of jobs, sustaining regional industries, and linking everything from auto parts in Ontario to aerospace components in Kansas. It's one of the most deeply intertwined economic relationships in the world, but also one of the most fragile. Prolonged tariffs risk doing more than slowing trade. They could choke American factories, drive consumer prices higher, and unravel the production networks that have powered continental prosperity since the 1990s. If Trump were to invoke the USMCA's 6-month termination clause, the ripple effects would be immediate. Investor confidence would plunge, joint projects could freeze overnight, and both nations might be forced to rebuild their economic frameworks from scratch. Yet, there is another possibility, a path built on cautious cooperation. If initiatives like the Golden Dome, joint F-35 procurement, and cross-border auto manufacturing take shape, they could anchor a new era of pragmatic interdependence, one defined not by rivalry, but by the shared imperative to survive. The The real question after this meeting isn't who outnegotiated whom, but whether North America can still act as a single resilient ecosystem, or whether the cracks have already gone too deep to close. Whatever the answer, one thing is clear. The future of this continent won't be decided by slogans or tariffs, but by the choices made quietly, in rooms like the one Carney and Trump just left. Because behind every handshake lies a bargain, and behind every bargain, a new balance of power waiting to unfold. Thanks for watching, and if this resonated with you, don't forget to like and subscribe. Every click fuels the truth.